Fox News Podcasts presents the Bret Baier Podcast, Common Ground.
There are a number of senators on the Republican side that continue to want to find common ground.
We emphasize the conflict and controversy sells, and I think that's a problem because most Americans look at Washington and see something that's broken.
Why don't we look for ways that we celebrate what this country is capable of doing?
It's amazing what you can do when you get off social media and you start talking and communicating with one another because there is common ground.
With Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier.
Despite our political differences, we both understand how the lack of transparency in Washington is damaging Americans' faith in our government.
We want Americans to see for themselves now and in the future whether or not our leaders in the White House are influence peddling. We are introducing this bill as one Republican and one Democrat because this isn't a partisan problem.
Well, that's the definition of common ground. That's this segment. We decided to do two this week. Tonight, we discussed that new legislation on presidential ethics. Joining us tonight, House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, and a member of that panel, California Democratic Congresswoman Katie Porter. Thank you both for being here. Let me start with you, Congresswoman. Why is this important? I heard that intro there, but why now? Why this?
Well, we're seeing trust in government at all-time lows, and so we need to try to restore that, and that should not be a partisan problem. We're seeing Democrats not trusting Republicans, independents feeling not heard. So every American benefits when we can trust that our president and vice president going forward into the future, whoever those people may be, are working for us and not for themselves.
I mean, you guys disagree on a lot of things, Mr. Chairman, but this one you see pretty much eye to eye.
Yeah, I think the overwhelming majority of Americans would agree with this. I mean, this is about confidence in our government, and Representative Porter's right. People have an all-time low confidence level of our government, and this is a good way to reverse that. Let's be transparent. Both parties have complained about the last 3 or 4 administrations having conflicts of interest. Let's fix it. This is a sincere bill that's thorough and substantive, and I think it'll make a difference.
So it's specific. It's presidents and vice presidents to disclose foreign payments, expensive gifts, loan transactions, tax returns during the 2-year period prior to time in office, during time in office, and for 2 years following the departure from office. It also deals with family members with the same list, which is important. It expands where we currently are.
Absolutely. We should have higher ethics standards for our president and vice president than we have for other federal officials. And right now, they're actually lower. So, for example, the conflict of interest provision that is in this bill actually already applies to other federal officials. So I think the point of the bill here is to make sure that upon taking office, every American can be confident that the president and those who have access to the president are working for the American people.
Mr. Chairman, not surprisingly, maybe, the Congresswoman was not mentioned in the White House statement on this bill. Ian Sams said, "We're always happy to look at Congressman Comer's bright ideas, but on his first day in office, President Biden implemented the strictest ethics standards of any administration in history. He has publicly released 26 years of his tax returns for the American people to see. The most of any president ever publicly releases his personal financial disclosures each year." So obviously there's a little pushback maybe from the White House.
Well, if what Ian Sams is true, then the White House should support this legislation. President Trump should support this legislation. I know the American people would support it if the media, and I appreciate you, Bret, covering this, if the American people understood this bill. I can't imagine anyone being against it, and I certainly wouldn't want to run for any type of office opposing common sense ethics reform legislation because, again, you know, regardless of who the president's been, the last 4 administrations, both parties have complained about conflicts of interest and ethics issues. There are a lot of gray areas in the law, and I think this bill addresses those gray areas. It closes some loopholes. The media has said that influence peddling is a cottage industry in Washington. If that's so, we need to change that, and I think this legislation will do that.
So you would urge the White House to embrace it?
Well, President Biden has been a real champion for ethics. He said that that's going to be a cornerstone of his campaign. And what his spokesperson said is true. President Biden has released 26 years of tax returns. He has put in place strong ethics standards.
Sure, obviously there's questions about his son. The Presidential Ethics Reform Act
would be incredibly consistent with his legislative priorities. So I am very optimistic that the White House will support the bill.
Yeah, obviously expanding to family members opens up questions that they don't deal with in that statement.
true. I mean, we're seeing more and more presidents who have adult children, relatives involved. And so I think the goal here is just to provide the right amount of disclosure to rebuild that trust. That was how we drew the boundaries. What do we need to tell the American people to get them to feel confident? And we think we have to include spouses and adult children to be able to do that.
We'll hear more after this. Speaking of disclosure, you paired up with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, introduced the Stock Act 2.0, a different version, just in December, but it seems, and tell the people what that does, what it's supposed to do.
So the Stock Act 2.0 would ban congressional stock trading. It would also require members of Congress to make disclosures about things that might create conflicts of interest. So for example, if a member of Congress is receiving a subsidy or a payment from the federal government, say for a business that they own, it would require that disclosure. So it's similarly a good governance, good transparency bill, and it has not moved forward in Congress. And I think one of the things I took from this experience is that a lot of folks in Washington aren't willing to hold themselves to account. And I'm really grateful that we've been able to find that common ground to do that.
You think there's movement on this Stock Act, Mr. Chairman?
I think it's, I do. I think a lot of members, it's like term limits. If you put it up, if you force people to vote on it, they're going to vote for it. Nobody wants to have the perception that their members of Congress are trading on stocks with insider information. So I think that our legislation, if we could pass it out of committee and it would go to the floor, I think that that's an amendment that could be put onto the bill to expand the ethics. The reason that's not included in the bill now, Brett, is because I would lose jurisdiction. The Oversight Committee has jurisdiction over the executive branch. We don't have jurisdiction over the legislative branch. So there are opportunities, once this bill makes it to the House floor, to expand it to include other areas of our government, which could include Representative Porter's bill.
Okay, that's a possibility. I want to just mention this because somehow quilting has become a unifying thing between the two of you. Your mom, a big quilter, taught people how to quilt, and Representative Porter and her mom also made a quilt together, featured in the Quilters Hall of Fame in Paducah, Kentucky. The National Quilt Museum is in Congressman Comer's district, and there is a shared love of quilts. That's a unique common ground.
That's true. We also were both FFA members. And so when I went to Mr. Comer's office when he became chairman to talk about what I wanted the Oversight Committee to accomplish, I noticed two things in his office: his framed FFA jacket, and I think I impressed you when I was able to recite the FFA creed from memory.
FFA is what?
Future Farmers of America.
There you go. Okay.
I was state president of FFA back in the day.
Okay.
He outranked me then, and he outranks me now.
And you had the quilt on the wall, so that was another.
My mom collected quilts. She didn't make quilts like her mom, but she mentioned my quilt, and come to find out, her mother is in the Paducah, Kentucky National Quilt Museum Hall of Fame, a very respected member. So that's how we developed our relationship.
Wow. Thank you very much. Pass the word up there at this Common Ground segment. Thank you. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.